I see many faces, some familiar faces, some new faces as well. So welcome. And what I would love to do is kind of scanning the room and getting the different kind of coaching backgrounds, different people in the space. So I was hoping to start with a quick poll. Just to ask you in terms of your coaching experience. This is a lecture about coaching modern leaders, and I'm imagining some of you will have experience coaching leaders already. Some of you might be new to this space. Maybe some of you are not yet coaches, qualified coaches, right? Maybe you are coaching curious, as they say, and maybe you're thinking of becoming qualified. So let me just open the poll, and I wanted to ask you, what is your experience? Let's launch this poll. Are you perhaps a qualified coach? Or not a qualified coach yet, but you have an interest in coaching? Maybe you're a coach in training. Maybe you're a qualified coach in early stages of your practice. Maybe you're an experienced coach, but you haven't done much leadership coaching to date. Or maybe you are working in leadership development already and you're an experienced practitioner. Okay, so I'm seeing votes coming in, and I see people are still joining us. So I'm just having a slow start to let as many of you as possible in, and then we'll get going. Okay, so looks like almost 90% of people have voted. Right, so let me end this for now. Hopefully this will be a representative of who is in the room and who is yet to come. So let me just share the results. Okay, so it looks like our winning category is coaches in early stages of their practice. Welcome, fantastic. It's 36%. And then we have some coaches in training, some experienced coaches who are not yet doing a leadership work, some experienced coaches who are doing this work already. So a good mix in the room, really a good mix in the room. So I'm hoping that wherever you are on this journey, that you will find today useful and thoughts. Your thoughts will be provoked. Maybe let me put it this way. So I just want to really welcome you again. And let me share my slides to start with. I have prepared a few slides for you tonight. So before we start, I also wanted to say that chat will be disabled at the beginning of this presentation, just for us to have a kind of undisturbed experience, but we'll be turning it back on a few times to do a couple of exercises. And also what I wanted to say is that Animas will be able to issue a certificate of attendance for you. So if you stay until the end, then my colleague Joan is going to share a link with you, and you will be able to fill some details in and do that. So, okay, let us start officially and get into the content. So what I want to say is that, leadership coaching, this is such a broad topic, and there are so many ways that we can tackle it, so many angles we could take. And what I want to say is that tonight's lecture is perhaps not a kind of how to do leadership coaching type of lecture, or how to get into the space, because I'm mindful that there have been a couple of really great sessions recently. One led by Mia O'Gorman, who led a session about corporate coaching success. Then we had another one by Astrid Corinne. I think I caught Astrid here. Yes, there you are, Astrid. About executive coaching as well. So I thought I can approach it from a slightly different angle tonight, just to give it a bit more of a rounded view. So what I was thinking we could do is to approach it from a perspective of three questions, three very kind of meta level questions. And the first one is, what challenges do leaders face today, right? Or now, or these days? Because something that we're really seeing is that the world of leadership is changing. The world is changing quite rapidly, actually. But what does it mean for leadership? This is one question I'd like to pose for us to reflect on today. And the second question that I'm hoping to kind of instill some reflection in you about is, what is our coaching work in service of? Because doing leadership coaching, we could really have very different coaching philosophies, very different approach to this work, and no two coaches are similar. So this is another thing I'm hoping that you can reflect on today. And lastly, I would like us to reflect on what are some of the qualities that we can cultivate to be the right partners for leaders in this very rapidly changing times. And I've really thought deep and hard about this, and I've selected 5 qualities that I'm hoping, could be really great for us to cultivate to be working and supporting the leaders of today and tomorrow, okay? And of course, this is quite a subjective list, so you might agree with me, you might not, and that's absolutely fine. We'll kind of hopefully have a good conversation. Now, what I want to also say is that the word lecture is sitting a little bit uncomfortable with me. And although, this is called the lecture, I really do not intend to lecture anyone. I don't claim to be an expert, right? I have my own experience, my own perspective to share, which I'm bringing to you here tonight. But my first identity, really, my first professional identity is a facilitator of thinking. So my aim here is to share some reflections, share some questions, and some thoughts, provocations for you tonight. And you're welcome to do with it whatever you please. And the topic of leadership is really vast, isn't it? There are so many ways to be a leader, so many ways to do leadership coaching. Apparently, there are over 50,000 leadership books on Amazon alone. And also, I'm really mindful that although I come from the corporate world, from financial services, Big Four and insurance, there are so many different flavors of leadership, right? There is leadership in the public sector, like the NHS. You can be a leader and be a founder of a startup, for example, right? A leader of a charity. And also even maybe a leader in your own house, maybe you're a parent, and which is very often a real test of our leadership as well. So there are so many ways to think about this, so many things we could be sharing, but we only have about 90 minutes today. So it's going to be a bit of a selection of thoughts. So before I go any further, I'd love to just quickly introduce myself, who I am and why me talking about this topic tonight. So I call myself a leadership and career coach. I'm a coach trainer at Animas Centre for Coaching, who is hosting this lecture. I'm also a coach supervision trainer at the International Centre for Coaching Supervision. And I'm also a qualified coach supervisor there as well. Now, my background, my professional background before I became a coach is in actuarial science. Okay. And if you don't know what that is, do not worry, because my parents still don't know. I'm a bit like Chandler Bing from Friends, when nobody knew what he was doing for a living. But it's basically insurance mathematics. And I've spent many years in risk management and doing lots of interesting things in catastrophe risk assessment for many years. But, my last chapter before I became a coach was in a Big Four consultancy. And this is where I had kind of my own firsthand experience of being a leader. But on top of that, we offered consulting services to, a number of different organizations. And I found that taught me so much about leadership, because, we would be offering advice, we would be doing reviews. Sometimes I would be offering like really some very constructive feedback to organizations. Sometimes also I would be working on secondment or like being embedded as part of teams in different companies. And this was such a study of leadership styles for me. Different cultures, different organizations, levels of inclusion, right? Like how those organizations, those leaders handled change, failure, feedback, right? And that experience really fed my paradigm of leadership. And in my work as a coach right now, a lot of my focus is on leadership development. And this could be a number of different things. And I'll be sharing some of this today, and kind of some of the possible avenues in the landscape of this work. Sometimes it's standalone coaching, but also sometimes packaged with other activities like psychometrics, maybe some training of skills, maybe some 360s and other bits of the process. And because of my background, I'm also often chosen to coach either in high performance organizations like consultancies, but also I'm often chosen to coach very analytical leaders. like chief risk officers or chief technology officers, head of analytics, data scientists, because they feel like I get them, given the background that I have. I also work a lot with other experienced coaches. And this is, whether in different communities I'm part of, but also as a member of the faculty at the International Centre for Coaching Supervision. And this kind of gives me a bit of a perspective of what's out there, right? Like what are the different avenues and areas of work that coaches are doing, also beyond the Animas kind of system. And I hope to bring all of this to you today. Now, what I want to say is that the views that I'm presenting here, kind of some of my reflections, are my own, based on my own experiences. And although I am part of the faculty here at Animas, they're not kind of the Animas official view. And I had full creative autonomy for this presentation. And when I share some stories, maybe some examples of my clients, I just want to say that although they will be based on real coaching assignments, please know that I've modified them so that confidentiality has been protected as well. Okay. So enough about me. Let's get to this session. So what are my hopes for this session? What are my hopes for what I would love for you to take away from it? First of all, I would love for you to learn a few concepts. There are some concepts that might be quite useful in thinking about this work. For example, we'll be talking about things like deference, things like vertical development. And there are some of those things I think is quite useful to know and useful to reflect on. I'm also hoping that you can reflect today on your philosophy of leadership, and also on your philosophy for coaching, but also your relationship with authority. I'll be talking about that today, and also on the qualities that you may want to cultivate for the future. I would also love for all of you to feel inspired to coach leaders. And I've noticed, in the poll that many of you are in training on early stages, and I feel like, this work can be so rewarding. It can be so rewarding. And what I love about this the most is that when I'm working with leaders and then they take whatever learnings, insights, change that they generate in the sessions that we have, when they take it to their teams, I really feel like we are creating ripple effects and can really influence cultures, teams. I'm kind of imagining them taking it to their teams and then their teams taking them forward. And I kind of love how our work can really live in the systems. And I'm hoping that you can maybe take some of that inspiration with you tonight as well. And lastly, maybe there's some action that you would like to take as a result of this lecture, whether this is something to do in your coaching, maybe a piece of reflection or anything else that might be useful. And I'd love at the end of the session to ask you kind of what that is, and perhaps for us to share some takeaways. Now, what I also want to say is that I always have this problem when designing these sessions, and I've done a couple for Animas already, is that there's just so much that I could put in, and there just isn't enough time. So hopefully, in an ideal world, I would have liked to have an entire day to fill it with breakout room conversations, learning, and so on. So, but I can't do that. So what I've done is I have prepared a little bit of a pack for you, which has the slides from this presentation, but also a workbook that you can take, and it has some reflective questions, some things you can do after this conversation, after this talk, to do some more work with your reflection. And it also has a list of references. So I will be introducing a number of different topics, but you can take it forward. You can really learn some more, download those files. So it has a link, a set of links that you can use. So I know that this is on the slide here, which might not be very useful in terms of copying. So I'm just pasting it in the chat as well, if you want that to hand. So there are also some questions that coaches in training often ask, and there's a selection of them here. Some of them are like, what is the difference between leadership coaching and executive coaching? Or a very frequent one is, a client wants to work with me for my experience, but I'm a coach. I want to offer coaching. How do I navigate this, right? Do I give advice or not? Or do leaders only work with coaches who used to be leaders or not, right? Another one that comes up often is leadership coaching the ICF type of coaching, or is it different? Is it more advisory, perhaps? Or very often a question that we grapple in our supervision group, and I see a few of my supervision group members here, so lovely to see you, is how do we offer transformative work in organizations that focus on performance? How do we marry the two? Are they compatible or not? And also, like, is the Animas training enough? Do I need any further qualification? Right? Some of those questions are kind of in the space. So I just want to say I'll weave the answers to them into this presentation. So hopefully you will get some clarity on those if these are indeed the questions that you are also carrying with you. Okay. I also want to say that we won't be having breakout rooms today. And this is because I have heard from so many of you that maybe you're at home and maybe people have kids around or cooking dinner and want to listen in the background. So today it won't be something that we'll be doing, but we will have a Q&A section at the end. And I also love to be able to use the chat and the polls to perhaps get some of your engagement in that as well. So before I go any further, I wanted to talk about modern leadership and traditional leadership. Because, and there was a question, someone asked a question on LinkedIn when this talk was announced. It's like, how do you define modern leadership? And, you know, this is something that, of course, you know, there can be many different takes on, but mine, and one that you can actually see in quite a lot of research, is that kind of traditional leadership is very often called command and control, right? It's very much linked to the military, and the kind of military style leadership is what many people used to believe good leadership was for a very long time, right? And in that traditional model, the leader is the one with ideas, the leader is the one making all of the decisions, and there isn't much input from group members in that space at all, right? Like there's a clear separation between the leader and the team. It's quite structured, quite hierarchical. And because of that, it doesn't really encourage creativity, right? Like, because the leader is the creative one. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide is a modern leadership, you know, what I see this as more collaborative. It involves the team more. The members of the team are there kind of invited to be quite autonomous. And there's a real paradigm shift here where a good leader's job is to achieve through others, is to achieve through their team. And the team is centered around the common purpose. And the team is the unit that is the powerful unit that's greater than the sum of the parts. And that's why I've chosen to illustrate this with a lighthouse, right? Because those kind of leaders are more mentors and coaches, rather than kind of bosses, you know, those kind of bosses, old school bosses. So what is the so what in that? I suppose that the so what for me is that although the traditional, the kind of authoritarian style might be useful in some specific situations, there is actually quite a lot of consensus that among kind of, you know, people like leadership thinkers, you know, not just us coaches, is that collaborative, inclusive leadership is really most suitable for the very unique times that we live in, okay? And, well, that begs a question, like, what kind of times do we live in? And I'm sure, you know, you will all know, because it's enough to open, kind of, you know, switch to any news channel to appreciate what the world feels like these days. But, you know, we've been hearing about VUCA for a long time, haven't we? It's been VUCA everywhere for quite a number of years, but it feels like it's only now that we really feel it in our bones. And there are so many factors contributing to that, aren't they? And I'm not going to go through all of them, because, you know, you can feel it in around you. But if you think about the combination of things like global events, right, and kind of changes in geopolitical situations, starting with Brexit. I'm sure many of you are in the UK. We had the pandemic, you know, the war in Ukraine and Gaza. potential re-election of Trump and all sorts of things like this that change potentially the world order. And if we layer onto this, the technology changes, artificial intelligence, and maybe even demographics, how leaders are leading across so many different generations in the workplace. Because of all of that, there is now consensus that VUCA is actually insufficient. VUCA is not enough. We need new frameworks. And that's where this framework called BANI has been coined by someone called James Cashew. And he is a thinker, a futurologist, an author, anthropologist. And he created this framework to invite us to think about how to respond to chaos. And BANI stands for brittle, right? So brittle, things we thought were robust and strong, they just stop working, they crumble. Anxious, you know, and kind of we live in relentless anxiety and fear. The non-linear element, right? Like there's no straight route from A to B. Like there are lots of a very non-linear phenomena in the world. And incomprehensible, right? It's hard to understand what is going on sometimes. Things keep changing quite quickly. And this is really challenging for many organizations and for their leaders, because the methods that worked yesterday won't work today and tomorrow. So this BANI framework, like I don't want to leave this as this kind of message of doom and gloom. It's not about that at all, because what's important here is that James Cashew also tells us like how to respond to this. And that brittleness can be tackled with resilience, right? So we all need resilience, personal resilience and resilience in systems. That anxiety, it really calls for empathy and for a human-centered approach. Like empathy is really one of those key capacities for leaders, you know, to really be in charge of people. That non-linearity, it really calls for agility. And that incomprehensibility, it calls for open-mindedness, right? And this is, again, one of those aspects that really touches on this paradigm shift in leadership, is that, you know, leaders kind of need to admit that they might not have all the answers. They might need to involve others and get help. You know, the challenges that we are facing right now, they don't require experts as such. They require like a really open-minded approach. Leaders who are capable of adapting, showing vulnerability, learning, right? Learning with others, learning from others. And, you know, something that I'm sure you'll appreciate, making decisions with less than perfect information, far less than perfect information. So I suppose if we take the context of what's happening in the world and what are some of those requirements, let's think about, you know, in coaching, what type of challenges do our leadership clients face? And not all leadership challenges are equal, right? So some challenges that our clients might bring are problems, okay? Problems, and you can see like there's this linear relationship there. And problems are tame challenges, right? They're solvable. Maybe someone has been in that situation before. They can be really complicated, right? It could be like launching a new product or maybe heart surgery even. It might be very complicated, but it can be solved. And we can also come across those tame problems in coaching. A common scenario might be, you know, maybe someone is put in a leadership position because they were really great at their job, they had great technical skills, but now they don't know how to lead. You know, maybe they don't know how to give feedback. It's a paradigm shift for them, but others have been there before. And maybe you have too, because you know, sometimes we would be coaching people or leaders that go through something similar that we used to. But you know, as the BANI framework shows us, the world is becoming increasingly nonlinear. So actually, the shape of that line might be an illusion, right? It might seem like a straight line, but it might not be. Now, the second type of problems here is a wicked problem, okay? And you can see that this is much more complicated. And the wicked problem is a term used in design thinking. It has been coined by Rittel and Weber in 73. And wicked problems are problems where there is no clear relationship between cause and effect. There might be many different elements that might be leading to that tangle, to that problematic situation. And because those challenges are uncertain, they may never be fully solved even. If you think about concepts like the gender pay gap, right? It's really caused by a complex interaction between culture, economy, right? Policy, biology, education, societal pressures, health, well-being, availability of care. It's a real tangle, and tackling one of those issues does not solve the challenge. And some people question whether it can ever be solved. So those kind of wicked challenges are best addressed through collaboration. The leader is often the facilitator, and they're harnessing the diversity of perspectives and thoughts and views to tackle them together. Now, the third type of problem, or challenge rather, could be a crisis, right? And a crisis is, again, it's a very different approach. And we had seen examples of this, for example, with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really shifted the behaviors of virtually every business, community, organization, right, on this planet. And crises, they need urgent action. And the leader acts a bit more in that authoritarian traditional style, because they might need to dictate response to the situation. Very often it's a fight or flight type of situation. And crisis coaching can also be useful, but I'm kind of thinking, well, is it deep transformative work? It might be not, right? Because this is very often a high stress situation, but it can very much be helpful in setting priorities, maybe moving from that fight or flight to more of an adult responsibility, maybe stepping away from drama triangles as well. And as coaches, we can support the leaders to help them manage that anxiety, maybe offer space for them to process what's going on for them, so that they can kind of keep it together for the team while sharing some of their vulnerability potentially, but actually being kind of in charge. So you might be thinking, okay, so what's the lesson from this? Like, why do we care? And I suppose the main thing for me here is that great leadership is very context dependent. A great leader will be able to kind of adapt their style to what's going on around them. And so is great leadership coaching, right? So it's not about accessing or approaching different challenges in the same way. And also something that I would love for us to think about, and something perhaps to be mindful of, is that we might be viewing something that the client brings through our own paradigm as a simple problem, but in reality, it's a wicked problem that might be very unique to the person, the organization, the team, the market they're in, the point in time. And it's quite important, I think, for us as coaches to hold a broader systemic perspective, at least as one of the lenses that we bring to coaching sessions. And if I think about, coaches in training who I work with a lot at Animas, sometimes it feels a bit unnatural, right? Because we might have that bias towards linear thinking. We want to roll up our sleeves with our clients and get to solve the issue. But actually, that is no longer enough. Although that was what used to be the paradigm of coaching for many years in the more performance arena. But the world we live in is more complex. It's more complex than it's ever been. So that complexity is important for us to hold. So let me share some examples of those complex leadership challenges that I've come across, and yeah, see what we think. So I probably don't have time to go through all of them, but a few to share. So the first one here, on the top left-hand corner, is leading across 5 generations in the workplace, right? And this comes up so much. So as of 2023, there are 5 generations in the workplace, spanning from 16 to 75 roughly, right? Starting with traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and then Gen Z. And I really see how challenging this can be, especially for those mid-level leaders, maybe like director level, when they are reporting to an old guard, very traditionalist, maybe executive board or senior leadership, but they have to get the job done through a team of maybe employees in their 20s, right? And they're exactly sitting in that, between those polar opposites that sometimes there might be a very different set of values. And as coaches, our coaches in training, you will know that, clash of values is a very difficult and emotionally charged place to be. But who is right? Who is wrong, right? It's about solving that. And it might not be a simple solution. And there's so many of those challenges, and I probably don't want to go through all of them. But, things like maintaining high team performance while stress and burnout levels are record high, right? Like, this is really challenging. Like, according to statistics from Gallup, for example, nearly 8 in 10 employees experience burnout at some stage. We live in a situation where work is endless. Like, it could literally be endless, but the energy is very finite. Just a few years ago, this wasn't even a conversation. I remember about 20 years ago when I had to work through the night on some really challenging projects. Like, we were asked to bring sleeping bag to the office to have a couple of hours of crashing time, and thankfully now there's so much more awareness of health and mental health, right, and burnout. But still, there's just so much to be done, and sometimes the leaders are holding that, being burnt out themselves as well. How do we solve this? How do leaders work with that when they have commercial pressures and teams? There are just so many of those challenges, and there is no one approach, right? They are really complex and need to be tackled as those wicked challenges. Okay. So, going further, I wanted to turn our attention to leadership coaching work. And something I wanted to say, and maybe this will be controversial to some of you, I don't know, but I want to say that in my view, leadership coaching is really not the same as coaching a person who happens to be a leader. Okay, so what do I mean by that? This is mainly because leadership coaches have this dual responsibility. Okay, as a leadership coach, we would be working with the human, right? The human being, like you would in coaching anyway, like working through the process of change, maybe helping them with their confidence or their executive presence, maybe helping them with their relationships, work-life integration, whatever you may have. But we also have moral and ethical obligations to the organization. And this is what makes it different, right? Coaching a leader, but the kind of personal coaching or life coaching, career coaching of a leader is not the same, in my book, to leadership coaching. So perhaps let's kind of shed some light on what leadership coaching is. So, as I mentioned, it's meant to meet the needs of the organization or the wider system, while at the same time working with the whole person. It's often designed to build the leader's capability to achieve some organizational goals, right? If the organization is paying for this coaching as well, they're a stakeholder. And in fact, the organization is also the client. So it's a bit of a triangle, right? And the client is made up of the organization and the person as well. And the coach will actually have contractual and ethical obligations to the organization as well. Now, something that how I think about leadership coaching is that it often happens at multiple levels in an organization. And this is what often makes it different to executive coaching, although sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. But often leadership coaching, it can happen at multiple levels. You could have, say, managers moving up to leadership that are getting some leadership coaching, even younger and less experienced leaders, high potentials, they could be having some leadership coaching as well. And it can go all the way up. Now, in this work, because sometimes the leader can be a little bit lonely, right? Like they might be holding a lot of responsibility, reporting to the board, to their seniors, managing the team. So the relationship between the leader and the coach is really at the heart of the work. And the point I'd love to make a bit later is that, that relationship can be really a very important part in making this work transformative. The quality, the vibrancy of the relationship, how we use that relationship as a bit of a kind of experimentation ground, as well as we notice things and so on. And very often, not always, but often what I'm seeing is that leadership coaching can take place as part of a broader suite of activities. Okay, sometimes it can be standalone, this coaching, but sometimes it's also combined with things like, using maybe psychometrics, maybe using 360 or kind of feedback assessments, also sharing some insights as well, some workshops, etc. So it's often packaged with a number of different things that are designed to kind of maximize the impact of the work. And it can also include skills training. In my case, it does often. So teaching about things like emotional intelligence, or often teaching leaders how to coach as well, right? And how to apply a coaching mindset in organizations, if this is something that is of interest to them, and if it's something that the organization wants. And perhaps with this in mind, I'm kind of thinking, well, good points to tackle the question, like, is it the ICF type coaching? Like, is it clean coaching, as we would sometimes call it? It's an interesting question to debate. And what I would say is very often it's more than that, but that more can be defined in different ways. So perhaps, offering a perspective, right? Offering that package with training, group facilitation, knowledge sharing, etc. Different retreats, events, and so on. But also sometimes, not always, but sometimes there are different types of coaching within that. So could be one-to-one, but also group coaching. For example, bringing leaders from different groups together and them to share their challenges and learn from each other. But also team coaching, right? Which is another thing. So the difference here is that in team coaching, the team is the client. And although the team is made of individuals and employees, it's not about coaching them individually, but it's about coaching in the group for the benefit of the team. Okay. And a question that also often comes up is, do we need any special qualifications to do this work? Like, do we need a leadership coaching course or CPD, etc.? And my honest answer is probably not. As in, there might be some different courses that you can take, but it's not that you need them in order to do this work. Like, don't let additional qualifications stop you. Probably what you bring and who you are and your experience will be more important than credentials. Although some psychometrics can be useful, some knowledge can be useful, frameworks can be useful, of course, that's there too, right, up for grabs. So I feel like I would love to get a little bit of input from you and maybe ask you, and Joan, if you'd be happy to put the chat back on, if it's off, for the time being. And maybe let me know the answer to this question. A bit of free association, okay? Thank you, Joan. What comes to mind when you think of great leadership? What is the first word, expression that comes to mind when I say great leadership? Okay, they're coming in. Let me see. Being heard, So many. Empowering, open and empowering, inspirational, self-leadership. Yeah. Being heard, listening skills, integrity, support, trust, flexible, leading by example, empathy, authenticity, equality, great, role model. Oh, so many great. I can't even read them all. There's so many fantastic things being put in here. Vulnerability, yes. Emotionally intelligent, yes, I really agree with that as well. Yeah, so many different things that are coming in. And I love that. I love that because, you know, these words that you have chosen will very much be, you know, kind of a product of your paradigm and what you think great leadership is. And I bet, you know, that will be quite different between all of us. There might be quite a few common threads, but actually your own leadership paradigm will be unique to you. And something that I would love to invite you all to think about is, you know, what is your leadership philosophy? Because it will be different. Like, for example, I'm seeing, you know, gets results, right? From Linda just now. And then I'm seeing growing together. And there might be things that are connected, but they might also be quite distinct. So something I'd love for you to think about is questions like, you know, what are your views on what great leadership is? Like, who inspires you as a leader and why? And how is that paradigm showing up in your coaching? And last question here, which I think probably most important for me personally, is what would you like your work to be in service of? Because there are so many ways to apply yourself as a coach in this space. And we have lots of choice. So if we had more time, I would be opening rooms and we'll be having this conversation, but we don't have a lot of time for this today. But I would love to invite you to have a think about this and maybe download the workbook that I shared, because there is a section there for you to think about that. And as a bit of example, you know, perhaps inspiration, I wanted to share mine, or maybe not all of mine, but some of the snippets from mine, in case it might be useful as you think about yours. So for me, emotional intelligence, and I've seen emotional intelligence being mentioned by someone as well, is really key in tackling wicked problems, right? And the way I view emotional intelligence is very much linked to how Daniel Goleman sees it. It's very broadly defined, includes so much more than soft skills or people stuff, how sometimes it's described. And also, I really believe that it's a muscle that can be developed. I also firmly believe that we all feel like imposters at times. And part of the work is to embrace our imperfect learning selves and really step into our growth mindset. My beliefs are also that, you know, things will never go back to normal, whatever that normal is. So we need to grow comfortable with uncertainty. Like, that's the only way. I also find that for me, the coaching relationship is a sandbox, as in what we do in coaching might be a bit of an experimentation ground, playground, learning ground for what's out there. And that maturing in life and leadership is about holding and embracing complexity. I feel like the world really wants us to believe and kind of get behind simple stories, but the richness of that complexity is really what makes a difference. I also believe that shared humanity is an essential nutrient in complex, chaotic times. And I really bring this to my work when I, for example, hold sessions on the imposter experience. When I see people sharing their humanity, for me, this is like music. You know, I absolutely love that. And I also believe that leadership comes with responsibility for getting people ready for future of work, right? I really believe that, because the world is changing. The competencies that we need, the skills that we need are changing all the time. If you think about the World Economic Forum, and they have the future of jobs report every now and again, and creativity is the first one on the list at the moment. And I'm thinking, well, what are leaders doing to encourage that, right? So these are some snippets from my philosophy, just an example for you. And what I want to show with that is that, of course, I'm not enforcing those views on anyone, but I know that they're there. They're there guiding my questions, my curiosities, my professional interests. And it's good to be aware of them. Also because when they might come clash with someone else's, I might be aware of that as well. So I would very much invite all of you to dig and unearth your own. Maybe spend some time in reflection with a colleague, with a supervisor, to understand what is underneath the iceberg for you in that. Okay. So I would like to move us on to thinking about, well, what is our job then, right? Like with everything going on in leadership, with everything happening with our world, what are some of those guidelines, ideas? What do we want to grow in ourselves to be the right partners for leaders? And I thought about it very deeply and very hard, and I created a very subjective list. But these are things I'm interested in and things I want to cultivate. So I'm sharing it again, and I'm not saying this is the truth. Absolutely not. This is just my perspective. And also, I was changing those quite a bit in preparation for this. So there might be others as well that I would add if I had more time. So the first one, the one I'd love to start with, is the systemic perspective. And I'm starting with this one because this is the territory that we are in already, right? Like this is about holding a broader systemic perspective as one of the very important lenses that we take to a coaching session. Okay. And systemic perspective, what this really means is that we are going beyond focusing on the individual. We are not only focusing on the individual, on their behavior, but we are taking in the wider context. This is really about the fact that no man is an island, right? We're all part of different systems that shape us. Some small ones, like families, big ones, like humanity or this planet, right? And everything in between as well. So this is a lot of what we've been talking about already, bringing in how the world is changing, inviting the broader context, looking at some of the forces that shape us. And for those of you who train with Animas, you will have covered this in the training, or if not yet, you will in module 5. And here is Nick Bolton's definition that I'd like to share with you. So a systemic stance in coaching recognizes that a person is part of multiple systems that shape and impact their beliefs, expectations, I'm lost now, aspirations, values, relationships, assumptions, purpose, meaning, and more. And that the coach is also part of such systems, and that these systems inevitably collide, collude, and coalesce in ways that shape the coaching. So to give you a practical example of this, because I know sometimes it's these systems can be so big, so wide, it can be sometimes hard to put our arms around it. But to give you an example, one of my topics of professional interest, as I mentioned, is the imposter experience. And although, feeling like an imposter is a very deeply personal and unique phenomenon to each person, it's also very much influenced by the forces that shape us, right? So if you think about what is expected of a man, or what's expected of a woman, what kind of are some of those implicit or explicit expectations that are placed upon us about performance? But I also, if we take more of a systemic perspective, also, I'm sometimes thinking, feeling like imposters makes us work harder and harder. And actually, who does this serve? It serves organization. It serves more broadly the capitalist culture that is striving. It's about perpetual growth, right? So by inviting the client to explore their challenge through a systemic lens as well, our work is immediately becoming more transformative. because we can appreciate some of those bigger forces. Maybe get a bit of self-compassion, understand them. It's not about feeling a victim to them necessarily, although some of them we might not be able to influence, but it's about awareness. And of course, the systemic lens is not the only lens. Like a good photographer, you would have a number of different lenses for different perspectives. But I think it's essential to take that broader view, to take a look, have a feel for the water that we are swimming in. So just something I'd love to leave you with today to think about. The second quality to cultivate that I wanted to talk about today, I called it an egoless authority, okay? Egoless authority, which might feel like an oxymoron to you, but I promise it's not. And I'd really love to have a conversation with you about authority. But before we do, I wanted to ask for your opinions again. And I'm going to launch a poll, so bear with me. I wanted to ask you can already start thinking about this question. Is direct leadership experience needed to do great coaching work, great leadership coaching work? And I will, as you think about this, let me just find the polls. There we go. Right. Is direct leadership experience needed to do great leadership coaching work? Votes are coming in. And I already see there is a mix of opinion. Oh, Jacqueline, I see you. It's not a yes or no. I get it. Okay. All right. Let me end this and show you the results. Can you see them? Yeah. Okay. So 67%, so 2/3, like we split in 2/3 to a third. 2/3 is a no, and a third is a yes. All right. I see some comments coming in. So I absolutely hear that. That, it's about, is it essential? Is it useful? So let's think about this. Let's think about authority. And here's a controversial thought that I have, which actually is not a yes or no in the poll. But my controversial thought is that to form thinking partnership with our clients, we need to step into leadership as well, okay? And this is because coaching is a partnership of equals. So if our client is a leader, we kind of need to step up into leadership as well. And to me, this is, and again, maybe you don't agree with me, and I get that not everyone will, but there is something about being a leader in that space, but it doesn't mean leading the client. I do not mean that at all. What I mean by that is that there is an appropriate form of leadership or kind of authority that I think we need to develop to balance the kind of the support and the challenge aspect of this work, okay? And this is important because, as we said earlier, the work is not only for the client, right? The work is also for the organization. And the coach needs to be able to challenge leaders, and at times they might need to represent the needs of the wider system. And it can come from your previous experience, but this is not the only way. It's not the only way. So I wanted to offer you a framework of thinking about this, which actually comes from the work of Peter Hawkins and Nick Smith. And I've included the source here on the slide. This is Coaching, Mentoring, and Organizational Consultancy, which is actually a supervision book. But I find like there's so many great parallels between supervision and leadership coaching. So I'm offering, and again, this is for us to have a think about. So what the authors have done is that they have divided confidence into three main aspects, okay? And the point here is that they benefit from being balanced. So you have, at the very top there, you have that presence, right? Which is kind of in the now. So presence is that ability to develop a relationship with different types of leaders, right? So it's like, how can we step into that space and develop that relationship and be really present in that relationship as well, right? Be able to kind of pick things up and really be there, be grounded. The second aspect here, I'm going clockwise, is about impact. So that's the future focus. Like, what are the interventions that create shift in thinking and feeling and assumptions? Okay, so this is about the work that you do and how it creates an impact. But that last area on this triangle is what you know, what you have done in the past, as in your authority, okay? And this is about like taking your rightful space, standing your ground, and it may be about your past experience. You know, maybe you've had that direct leadership experience. And as I think Sami said in the chat, you know, it really can open doors. Sometimes it's essential for to be selected for the work. And even if it feels unfair, I know that some executives kind of can't imagine working with a coach who hadn't been through what they're going through. And sometimes, you know, it's an illusion anyway, because it won't be exactly the same, but the client kind of perceives that they are in good hands. But sometimes it's not about titles at all. Sometimes it's about stages of life. You know, maybe say there's a leader transitioning towards retirement. You know, they might want to have their space held by someone who they feel that gets them, right? But although, you know, this is often how this works, it's not the only way. And I really want to talk about this. And one example here, if you think about like really example of firm authority without the title, you can think about Greta Thunberg, right? Do you remember her United Nations address when she stood in front of world leaders and asked them, like, how dare you? You know, she was a young girl and she was taking her rightful place. She was having a voice. So I suppose what I love to say is that there are coaches of great authority who have never been in leadership positions, but they bring a unique sense of authority. This could be anything, could be knowledge of a topic, could be a specific skill, you know, maybe something really valuable, like, you know, like that creativity that is so high in the future of skills lists, right? Or it could be an experience from other fields, you know, maybe sports or music. So if you don't have that flashy executive CV, I'd like to really invite you to think about what else that you bring that is so desirable. And maybe take a look at that future of jobs reports as well. And I find that no conversation of coaching authority can be complete without talking about deference. And this is a concept that I would love for every coach to know and perhaps to explore for themselves. Because every practicing coach will know that that feeling of confidence is not a constant. It's not a constant. You know, we don't have like a level, a feeling of confidence and authority. Most coaches, even the most experienced ones, will have at some point come across a situation or a client that will make them so much less effective than they normally are. Like on this picture, right? This person taking their hat off to that leader on the pedestal and feeling a bit kind of sweaty and anxious as they do. And this is important for us to think about. Imagine the following situation. Okay, imagine that you are meeting a potential client. Okay, you're meeting a potential client, maybe you're traveling to their office, and you're feeling okay, like you feel like you've got what it takes to work with them, like kind of the brief suited you, you feel okay about kind of how balanced your triangle is. And maybe you arrive, you wait at the reception, imagining that's in person, and then the client arrives, and there is something in the way that they look at you, maybe like the firmness of their handshake, or maybe their body language. You know, there's something about them that suddenly you feel small. Or maybe they start talking about the great work that they do, and then you kind of feel like a novice. Like maybe that you can't possibly be the right coach for them. And that feeling can come about quite suddenly. And when it happens, it means that, to use the language from, again, Hawkins and Smith, we've crossed our deference threshold. And each of us will probably have a very specific, unique kind of individual circumstances where this kind of need to defer to another person kicks in. And the thing is, if we're not aware of it, it can really make us doubt ourselves. It can even like paralyze us, right? We can go into fight or flight. But if we look into it and if we explore it, we can have more control over it. And maybe even improve our coaching skills. So I would really love to encourage you to reflect on any experiences where you've crossed that threshold for yourself. Like maybe unpick that sequence. What happened? What did you notice? What were you aware of? And I have included some reflection prompts about this in the workbook as well. But you know, there is another possibility too, because it might not be about us at all. It might be, but it might not be. It might be a feeling that perhaps the client has been unconsciously communicating to us. And this is where, you know, great coaching really kicks in, because our role might be to very gently name it. And this is what in supervision we call a parallel process. You know, when there are things happening between the coach and the client that have parallels outside in the client's world. There's something from the client's world that they are bringing and kind of reenacting in the session with us. And that we're entering the world of psychodynamics. And to be able to really work well with this, the other kind of capacity or capability that I would love to invite you all to think about developing for yourself is the use of self, which is exactly what this example is about. And this is my invitation to any coach, right? Whether you are a transformative coach doing leadership work or not, or being a life coach, like bringing ourselves more into the relationship. So what does this mean? What does this mean? It means taking your here and now experiences, and it could be anything, it could be feelings or thoughts or images, metaphors that come to mind, and then using them as data about what might be happening for the client. And sometimes it's about just feeling them, being aware and using them kind of behind the scenes. But sometimes it's about having the courage to share some of it too. Because as in that, you know, deference example, it might be some unconscious material that the client might not allow themselves to connect with, and we might be picking it up. You know, and especially, you know, with that novice-like feeling, if I feel like an imposter in most session, then it's unlikely it's about the client. It might be about me. I'm just not very confident. But if this feeling arrives suddenly, and that's not how I usually feel in a session, it might be worth checking in and perhaps naming it, as in, I don't know. I really hear that you're doing some great work with the team, but where, if at all, there might be doubt in this situation, right? Noticing it. And you know, earlier this week, I actually experienced a demo of an AI coach a few days ago, and I was so impressed. And I was so impressed with how great AI was at paraphrasing and asking coaching questions. I was like, wow, amazing. But actually, it was significantly less good at working with emotions. Because, you know, we have the full potential of our human apparatus, so to speak, right? And this will always differentiate us from artificial intelligence. So that's the kind of use of self. And the definition here is kind of using yourself as an instrument. That's kind of often a term that's thrown around. And using yourself as an instrument is about being aware of and using your own emotional, perceptual, cognitive processes to create the impact that is needed in the system and bring our whole selves to the work that we do. You know, and this really links to transformative coaching as well. because at the very heart of the transformative coaching framework, or the 5 principles by Animas, you have that phenomenological principle, right? Working in the here and now, using the here and now experience. And as a transformative coach, you can do that. You can do that to help the client to recognize how they are in the world. And the coach is like that skillful instrument, right? Picking things up. And there's a reason why I've chosen an illustration of a flute here, because the flute is one of the finest and most sensitive musical instruments, apparently. I don't play the flute, but that's what I'm told. And as with with an instrument like that, you kind of need to treat it with care and take it to regular maintenance. And it's the same for coaches who are working this way, who want to work this way. It's about care and maintenance, which is reflective practice and supervision, because it's really important then to distinguish, like, what is mine? What might be my kind of stuff, my emotions, my noise, my data, my doubt, and what is coming from the client's system. And when we build that awareness in, we can do some really great work. Right, so next one from the 5, this will be number 4. I wanted to talk about vertical growth. I want to talk about vertical growth because vertical growth, vertical development as well, how it's called. Because for me, when I discovered this, it was a bit of a revelation, actually. It was like a missing piece. And I can really see why it's getting increasingly popular and very much used in the leadership development work, because it's a very useful map that builds or uses the adult development theory. And that theory says that, people evolve over time, no surprise. But research also says that when we develop, when we do evolve, we do so in predictable ways. There are some stages that we go through, and those stages come with different mindsets. And I've learned to call those action logics. And those action logics will make us interpret events or make meaning of life, our goal, etc., in specific ways. And this applies to leaders too. And you might have leaders who are at different stages of development, and we can help them develop as well. So there are a few different maps out there. The words that I'm about to show you for the stages, they come from the Harthill Leadership Development Profile, which is the one I'm familiar with. There are different maps there too, but they kind of look at a very similar thing. But what they say is that these are sequential stages that we go through. So let me just share a few of those, just to give you a flavor of what those stages are. And I've included some links in the resources to guide you to more reading about this if you wish to. So the first one is impulsive. So this is being reactive, like really focusing on own needs, kind of quite a childlike state or phase. The second one is an opportunist. So an opportunist will have a short-term perspective, like they would seek advantage, personal advantage, kind of it's all about me, how do I win, etc. Then you have the next stage is a diplomat. And the diplomat is about conforming and fitting in. So very often kind of working to group standard, very difficult for them to be different perhaps and stand out. Then we have the expert, and the expert really loves to know their stuff. They love to have the answers, to be the master of their craft. And some people, including some leaders, actually finish at that stage and don't go any further. But if they do, the next stage is achiever. An achiever is all about delivering results. So it's kind of less about input and knowledge, it's more about the output, and it's a very common stage. Plenty of managers operate at that achiever stage. The next one, individualist. And an individualist is a very kind of existentially difficult stage, because the individualist will be asking themselves, like, is this all I do? Like they might start questioning everything, including themselves as well. And it can be really tough. But there's more and more free thinking going on at that stage. And after that, we have the strategists. And the strategists start seeing systems, right? They take a broader view. They maybe are increasingly open to paradox, right? Or maybe some contradictions as well, maybe more comfortable with uncertainty. And the last two here are the alchemists, and the alchemist sees more globally. They are more aware of constructs, and often in organizations, they might be generating quite a bit of transformation. And last one, ironists, even further into human potential. So I know this is kind of a lot of information, and of course you can read more about them. You can get profile of where you are and where your clients are and help them. But I suppose if I were to think about a simple metaphor that summarizes this, it's the one here that I've come across reading the work of Nick Petrie, who is a practitioner and a researcher in the space, is that horizontal development, so adding things like skills and expertise, etc., is like filling your cup, right? You fill your cup with things. But vertical development is making the cup bigger. The cup grows. There is more emotional intelligence. There's more capacity for complexity, for paradox, for uncertainty, and so on. And I suppose two questions I'd like to leave you with about that, to think about, to reflect on in your own practice, which is, first of all, check your horizontal to vertical balance. Okay, like when you do this work with people, how much of it is the doing versus the being, the expertise versus the capacity. And it's not to say that vertical is better necessarily, because both are needed. And I imagine them kind of being quite in balance. But just checking in, when we're tempted to kind of offer that, perhaps that the tip, the expertise, the framework, the technique, are we doing also enough on the vertical axis? And also the second question I'd like to invite you to think about is, how are you growing vertically? Like, how are we all growing vertically? And you might wonder, like, how do I do this? Like, how do we move through the stages if you're not familiar with this? And it's not a quick fix process. It can take years to move through the stages. But what I really like is Nick Petrie. He talks about three primary conditions. And one of them is heat experiences. It's like when we face a complex situation that maybe disorients us, or maybe disorients or disturbs our habitual way of thinking, like what Mezirow calls a disorienting dilemma. It's often the start of a transformative learning experience. Second is exposing ourselves to different worldviews. Some worldviews that challenge our mental models, like being exposed to multiple perspectives, being able to hold two opposing ideas and seeing them both as right. That's a skill. It's an art in that. And last kind of condition he talks about is sense making with people at more elevated stages of development. Like, how can we have those conversations to grow this way? Now, mindful of time, we are running out of time, so I'm going to move on to. I'd love to have some space for a couple of questions as well. The last capacity, the last one to cultivate, I wanted to talk about, and I'm not going to spend too much time here because the topic of uncertainty has come up already today, and hopefully by now you don't need a lot of convincing that being comfortable with uncertainty can really help us in those bunny times, and really our own comfort with uncertainty can help to hold the client in that safe uncertainty as well. And after all, we even have an ICF marker for this, which is 5.5, if anyone is wondering, comfortable working in the space of not knowing. But if you would like to explore this a little bit more and think about your own relationship with uncertainty, like I have done a talk about this for Animas also, which is called The Uncertainty Cure, a practical guide to navigating the unknown. So if you'd like that, it was recorded and it's you can access it on YouTube. So last reflection for today, which is leadership coaching advisory? And sadly, some of it out there is, which sometimes is a bit of a shame. And I know that, there is this conundrum for us, is when we start learning to coach, we are asked to kind of unlearn the fixing, the directing, etc. And very often coaches do that in order to qualify, to get their credential. It's like, oh, I need to do this ICF type session, but then what is often missing after that is the space of how can I then reintroduce my prior experience, but in a way that is fully intentional, in a way that is not coming from bad habits or from, oh, I just can't bother with this ICF stuff anymore, but in a way that's fully appropriate for the here and now, as a perspective, as something offered like an observation, lightly, without attachment, without ego. So one model that I'd love to share with you, and we really don't have a lot of time, so I'll just breeze through it very quickly, and you can read about it if you wish, is a model called 4 Modes of Coaching Presence, and it comes from the book Coaching Presence by Maria Eilif-Wood. And it basically shows us that there are different stages, and the first stage, or the first coaching presence mode, is called the invisible coach. And this is really linked to the belief that every client is creative, resourceful, and whole. They don't need fixing. It's about holding that space where they can access their own wisdom, deep listening, silence, not interpreting, all those things that really keep our own paradigm at bay. But this is not the only way, right, to coach. So the second mode is called the emergent coach. And the key principle in the emergent coach is that sometimes our client will know more than they can access by being held in that invisible coach mode. Like there may be other resources that are currently not in their awareness that we might help them to access. And it could be about introducing stakeholders and their perspectives, maybe using some creative techniques, invoking the body, right? Maybe using ourselves as the instrument to kind of get a feel for what is needed. But then we can also be more visible in what Maria Eilif-Wood calls the evident coach. And this is where our own data, for example, feelings, experiences, anything kind of that's going on for us in our body, some sensations, when we use them appropriately, they can actually trigger some very useful insights for the client. So this is about, again, using ourselves as the instrument, but in a more open way, in a more transparent way, sharing those observations, paraphrasing, sharing feelings, sensations, right? Maybe sharing our own vulnerability. But what is really important in that mode is that this comes from the point of a conscious choice. It's not because, oh, kind of spur of the moment thing, but it's like, actually, I'd like to do this because it would really be useful for my client. And also when we are stepping into that evident coach mode and sharing something, an observation, something that makes us a little bit more in that space, it's important to then go always back to the invisible coach mode so that the client can take their own learnings, make their own conclusions, make their own connections. So we're using that evident coach mode for the benefit of the client. And the last one here is a visible coach mode. It's fully visible, right? So this is a situation where we might be sometimes intentionally deciding to be visible, and maybe willing to create a bit of discomfort for the client if we feel like this is in the interest of their learning. So this could be things like, it often comes up in training, interrupting the client maybe, right? Or maybe calling it out when they're running around in circles. Maybe inviting a perspective that might be uncomfortable for them. Maybe challenging an ethical issue. I remember I was reading Hattie Einzig's book, Future of Coaching. And I remember she said, like, where were the coaches during the financial crisis? Where were the coaches? Why? What was happening, right? And I think like challenging ethical issues is part of our work as well. So how can we do that? And again, it's really important to end with invisible coach after that, so that the client can really process that intervention. So I suppose in summary, yes, our leadership clients will often want more than the invisible coach, and that's fine and good. But great coaching is about doing this very consciously and very intentionally for to benefit, right, the client, the organization, the wider system. So just to sum things up, and then if you have some questions, I would love, Joan, if you'd be able to open the chat, maybe we can put some questions in the chat, you can ask them, and then we'll have space for maybe one or two. But I want to talk about how can leadership coaching be transformative, right? This question of like, so how can we do this? How can we be transformative coaches in different spaces, also in organizations? And this is just kind of a summary of things I've shared already, just on one slide, as in working with the here and now, and really using ourselves as the instrument. So this goes to the phenomenological principle at the very heart of that model. Also, working with the human, or the whole human, right? But also keeping that wide lens on the needs of the system. And this really goes to that holistic and systemic principle of transformative coaching. Also, we can stand in that humble authority and build a relationship of equals with our client that can really contain the work, that relationship being at the heart. And that really goes to that humanistic principle that we are very much exploring here at Animas. But also, it's about evoking awareness of the client's inner world and the way in which they make meaning, right? That meaning making, very much touches on that psychological principle. And lastly, mastering being intentional. And when we integrate your knowledge, your experience, frameworks, anything else that you bring, do it in a way that's fully conscious and intentional. So there we are. I see some questions coming in the chat. Let me see what, let me see. Can you recommend, Christina asked, can you recommend any books, readings, practices around using self as instrument in the coaching space? Oh, great question. Yes, I agree. I can't think of any books that are particularly on this topic, but so if anyone does, please feel free to put it in the chat. It would be great to know. But what I would recommend is reflective practice, 100%, because every time we are in a session with a client, there might be things going on for us. And sometimes it's quite hard to be able to kind of isolate them in the moment and use them while we are present with the client. But very often after the session, we can take a bit of time to decompress, kind of reflect. And very often, like I would often recommend this to coaches I work with, is to write down like what was going on for you, what was your kind of self as an instrument, a data stream telling you. And then from there, maybe ask the question of, well, if you were sure, or you could be absolutely, it could be guaranteed that it landed well, what could you have brought to the client? So really practicing, rather than practicing kind of listening to our instrument and doing it this way. But I'm not aware of any books on that. Let me see. Oh, there are so many questions here. Do you run into ethical issues, conflict of interest as a coach when the leader of an organization goal mission turn out and start to be misaligned? Yeah, absolutely, right? Absolutely, it could be, because there might be that the coaching is provided by the organization, but then the leader brings in maybe a different agenda, or there is misalignment. But again, as a coach, I would be creating space for the exploration for this, right? So absolutely. I would love to ask you, mindful of time, and I'm mindful that we need to close in a couple of minutes, would you be willing to perhaps share one takeaway in the chat, write it down. What are you taking away? And this could be anything, could be one idea, something that you thought about, something maybe I shared, maybe a new concept, or maybe something that you will do as a result of being here. So I'd love to hear some of those. I see them coming through. Bani, yes. Oh, I am enough. Oh, wonderful. The power of paradox. Deference. Lovely. Oh, so many great takeaways. Thank you. Loving them. I'll study them in detail and really will savor them more than we have time for. So I just want to thank you so much for being here this evening, for listening, for sharing. I'll know that, you know, it's a very one-sided type of broadcast this evening because of the size of the group, but I just want to thank you so much. And I hope to see you elsewhere in the Animas system. Have a wonderful evening. And enjoy your leadership coaching work. Bye.